All right. Hello all. I am Mo. It's my nickname. Full name is Muhammad, but I like to go by Mo. It's like short and sweet, one syllable. Um, so I'm currently serving with AmeriCorps in the public health department of it. I am serving in Nashville, New Hampshire, and it's my seventh, eighth month, I think, and it's going pretty well so far. Learned a lot. I gained a lot of skills so far, learning a lot about community engagement. Um, Aside from that, let's introduce someone really special that we're here to learn from together, Heather Chandler. And just a little bit about Heather. Heather is the owner and founder of the Green and Healthy Maine magazines, the Green Home and Energy Show, and the SunriseGuide LLC, a regional media company dedicated to inspiring and supporting sustainable lifestyles. She has been educating Mainers about ways to reduce energy consumption, increase comfort at home, and protect our natural resources, while helping Maine's green economy grow and thrive for nearly 20 years. She served on the board of directors for Passive House Maine and the Maine Community Bank Charitable Foundation, and is an advisory trustee of Portland Trails and the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. She is a graduate of the 10 KSB Entrepreneurship Program at Babson College, the Institute for Civil Leadership, and Maine's Top Gun Business Acceleration Program. Heather served as an AmeriCorps member and leader for the NCCC in Denver, Colorado. And so Heather, she's been all over the place. She's
Thanks, Mo.
yeah, of course. And just before we get started, I have to just read a little disclaimer just so we all on the same wavelength during the meeting. So AmeriCorps is a bipartisanly supported and nonpartisan national service program that aims to engage citizens and in service to make their community stronger no matter what their political beliefs. This speaker series is designed to highlight former national service members and how their service helped them become successful in their chosen field. These events are not an opportunity to promote a political campaign or advocate for individuals to support on any side of a political issue or another. All right, to start off, Heather, do you have any words to kind of piggyback on the introduction kind of gave you?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. It's a beautiful night, so I really appreciate you sharing some early, almost summertime, some of your evening. So I'm thrilled to be here. AmeriCorps holds a very dear place in my heart and always will. And so I'm just really touched to have the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about that experience and how it's really shaped my life since then.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Heather. We're glad to have you as well. And just to start off, I'd like to ask you a question just about your history, just to see, if we can go back to trace how you got to where you are now. So first off, I'd like to ask you what inspired you to start the Sunrise Guide back in 2006, and how did you recognize the need for it in Maine?
Yeah. I was working in healthcare marketing at the time, and it was a position that I really loved for a long time. And then it got to a point where I didn't feel that it was really satisfying me anymore. And so I was starting to think about, what I wanted to do next. And I was, reading the What Colors Your Parachute and finding work that matches your values and just really kind of doing a full-on process to try and figure out what it was that I was going to do next. And around that time, I traveled to the Northwest to visit with some friends that lived in both Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. And while I was out there, both of them happened to have the same publication on their coffee tables called the Chinook Book. And I just fell in love with the concept. It was essentially an annual resource guide, and half of it was educational content all about healthy, sustainable living and local resources. And then the other half was coupons for local businesses that supported that lifestyle. So everything from natural food stores to green cleaners, yoga studios, you name it. And it just kind of lit a spark. And I thought, oh my gosh, this would be awesome to have in Maine. And so that was really the seed where it started. And I came back to Maine and reached out to that company and said, hey, will you guys come open an office in Maine and I'll run it for you? And they were awesome. They talked to me, actually. And they said, sure, you sound really enthusiastic. And if you want to do that in Maine, we'll do that. You just need to raise $150,000 and then sure, we'll open an office. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to set about raising $150,000. Had never done that before, but I thought, okay. Started shopping the idea around and ultimately raised about 35. And they said, that's just not enough for us. So we're sorry, we're not going to be able to do it, but we'll understand if you do it anyway. So long story short, I started talking to other people around and meeting with lots of businesses and other environmental organizations, and people were pretty excited about the idea, and so I decided to start it anyway. So I don't know if I got off topic there on your question. That
Oh,
was
you're on
really
topic.
the inspiration of starting the business way back when.
That's awesome. That kind of goes into my second question, which is about what challenges you faced when launching your the SunriseGuide in Maine, and how did you overcome them? So I guess one of those challenges was possibly that initial rejection, I guess, that kind of motivated you to go on it on your own, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, initially after that happened, I set the idea down because I didn't have any experience in starting a business. I didn't have family who'd run business. And so at the time, it just wasn't even in my realm of possibilities. And so I set it down and I kept looking for a little while of, what else am I going to do? And I just kept coming back to it. And I was like, I really just want to do this book. So as far as challenges, I would say they were in some ways similar to probably what most small business startup folks face. You're kind of, um, unless you have backers and a lot of money, you're really bootstrapping and doing it on your own. And, um, you know, you're the one who's wearing all the hats and keeping the dream alive and putting so much energy in and working so hard and lots of hours, lots of pizza. So I think those were the challenges early on. And then specific to, I mean, obviously, once I decided I was going to do the business, um, specific to the business, it's a smaller pool here in Maine than in metropolitan areas like Portland and Seattle. And, they had said that their model was that for something like that to be successful, you needed 750,000 people. And I thought, well, we don't have that in our metro area, but we have it in the state. So I think we can do it as a regional basis. I'm going to start this as a regional concept. And, there weren't as many green businesses. I mean, it's still sort of budding back then, 20 years ago. And so it was a smaller pool to pull from, but we just made it regional and made it work and launched. The first book was, I think it was 2006 was our first, 2006 or 2007. I'm drawing a blank, but yeah.
Yeah, were there any challenges afterwards that you didn't expect?
After starting the business,
Yeah.
all sorts of challenges. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's peaks and valleys running a business. And so, and also learning from scratch, like not having gone to business school. It was really learning as I went how to run a business, how to create a media company, how to hire staff, how to do HR, how to do marketing, how to do websites. I think that was really challenging is really just learning all the things. But I will say that my experience was that Maine was incredibly supportive to businesses, startup businesses. And, I remember at the time I had heard this kind of storyline and this myth, that was, kind of circulating that Maine wasn't friendly to business and wasn't a friendly place to do business. And my experience was completely different than that. I found so many organizations that wanted to support startup businesses, from Coastal Enterprises has a women's business program. The SBD, Small Business Development Centers, the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs. There were just so many organizations that were there to just do whatever they could to help you. And not only that, just this sort of culture and ethos of, people just pitching in and sharing their expertise and their resources to help launch this thing. And so, it's cliche, that it takes a village, but it absolutely took a village. And I am so grateful that there was a village there to do it. So I'll say one other thing that comes to mind with that is a good friend of mine started a business 5 years before mine. And I remember watching him start his business and thinking, oh my gosh, I could never do that. That looks really hard. And like all that weight is on his shoulders, and it's kind of lonely sometimes when you're doing that on your own. And I thought, oh, that's just not for me. So kind of funny that it ended up being for me. But he told me once, he said, starting a business and running a business is going to give you the absolute best days of your life and the absolute worst days of your life. And it absolutely was true, because you are elated when things go well. This is your baby, you create it, you put all this creative energy into it. And when it works, you are on cloud nine. Like there is no better high in the world. And then if it doesn't work, if you have a bad day or somebody rejects your idea or something you're really excited about, someone doesn't support it, it can really tank you, especially early on, So yeah, lots of peaks and valleys along the way.
Confidence is pretty big into how you even were able to make all those connections in Maine, I'm supposing. It couldn't have just been them, just giving you an olive branch. You must have also been a pretty likable person and had a pretty direct and assertive way to go about getting your magazine out there, right?
Thank you. I was very resourceful and, naively optimistic. I didn't know not to ask for things. I just did it. And as a result, people, people wanted to help, So yeah, I know that you have a question later on about advice, but that was definitely one of my big learnings is that people really want to help. And it's probably true everywhere, but definitely true in Maine.
That's awesome. That kind of goes into my next question about any mentors or key influences in your life that kind of encourage your passion for environmental stewardship and like community engagement as well.
Um, this one makes me think of my parents. My parents were pretty socially active when I was growing up. We lived in Western Mass and they were really involved in lots of causes. And so as kids, we spent a lot of time, I have a lot of memories going to marches, civil rights marches, gay rights marches, women's rights marches, you name it. And so I felt like I was just steeped in sort of compassion, and I think that really planted the seeds to going on and doing mission, heart-centered work. So I think that definitely those experiences, my very early years and the influence of my parents, I would say were some of my earliest mentors anyway, but I was fortunate to have lots of mentors along the way. And I think really the experience of being in AmeriCorps and then going on to work at the Commission for Community Service, like that really shaped that as well, because I had exposure to so many different projects, from, trail building to erosion control, urban gardens, native plants, Habitat for Humanity. And, all of those experiences helped to broaden my awareness of issues and taught me a lot about conservation and sustainability. And so I would call AmeriCorps a pretty significant influence as well.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about how your term was even?
Yeah, so I served in the AmeriCorps NCCC out in Denver, Colorado, and I think I was the second class, yeah, the second year of AmeriCorps.
Yeah, I
And
think you were
so,
too.
what's that?
I think you were the second class.
Yeah. You and I
Because
were
you're
in
third,
AmeriCorps
you're,
leaders together,
yeah,
right?
we were leaders the third year of
Third
AmeriCorps.
year. Yeah. So NCCC was an awesome program. I don't know if you have, if anyone here has experience with it, but it's a residential program, and you do your project. You're organized into teams of 10 to 14 people, and you do projects around a region of the country. So we were responsible for 17 states, and our projects changed every 6 to 8 weeks. So we got to survey a whole bunch of different types of service, and that was really awesome. It was really, really cool to have exposure to, you know, fields and professions that I would have never even considered going into, because I just didn't even know they existed. I remember when we were doing trail work in Ridgway, Colorado, and there was a huge dam at the state park that we were staying at, and we did work. We did some like erosion work around the dam. We did some built rock steps and trails and things. And I remember becoming fascinated with dams. Like, I never thought about dams before. Why would you if you weren't really
Right.
around them? And I remember thinking, wow, maybe I'll go into dam engineering. But it was just kind of like that. You got exposure to so many different things. And so as a result, it broadened your horizons and really helped you to see possibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise known. So I'm a big fan of that program. And then I stayed there for a second year to be an AmeriCorps leader. And that's actually how Steve and I met, through the National AmeriCorps Leader Program, where we came together for national trainings. So that second year I stayed, and I did the public relations for the campus. And that really, really planted some seeds for the work that I do now as well, because we had a lot of training in communications and marketing in that role from the national office. And leadership, the AmeriCorps Leaders Program too had a pretty amazing leadership program that it put us through, a year-long training program that was pretty top-notch.
Yeah, I can see AmeriCorps being a very your term having been very beneficial for even the birth of Green Healthy Maine. There's a big connection to the vision there, which kind of like makes me wonder how your vision for Green Healthy Maine has evolved throughout the years. And like,
Yeah.
where do you see it going, say, in the next 5, maybe even 10 or 15 years? I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sky's the limit.
Um, well, I've talked about the SunriseGuide, and so that was that book, that coupon book and resource guide, and that was our first publication. We did just that for the first 6 years. So we just published this annual behemoth of a book, and that after 6 years, in 2012, we started to realize that there was an opportunity to deliver this information to people who were coming to Maine as visitors, but that book was really kind of overkill for them. So we wanted to develop a product that would introduce people, if you were coming to Maine to visit and you cared about, restaurants that sourced locally, and you wanted wellness experiences and you wanted to get outside of, away from the tourist areas, we wanted to create a product that would deliver the experience that we were sharing in the Sunrise Guide, but kind of tailored more towards a visitor demographic. So that was our second publication. We launched a magazine, our first magazine, in 2012 called Green and Healthy Maine Visitor's Guide initially. And then couple of years later, 3 years later, we launched our second and third magazine, Green and Healthy Maine Homes. We had always educating about clean energy and green homes was always part of the Sunrise Guide. And around that time, it was obvious to me that sector was really growing and there was a lot of opportunity to do education in that sector. And so that was where the idea came from to do the Homes magazine. So at that point, we were publishing 4 times a year with the 2 annuals. So we had our Sunrise Guide once a year, the Visitor's Guide once a year, and then 2 Homes magazines. And then, gosh, I'm losing track of where I was. So that was 2015. 2019, we launched a show, the Green Home and Energy Show. And that really came from the idea that, like, everything we were doing was sort of one-dimensional. We were really only reaching people in print and online. We also launched an app in between there, but we knew there was an opportunity to expand on that by bringing people together in person. And that was the idea behind the Green Home and Energy Show, which came about in 2019. And then the pandemic hit. And so we had one show, and then we had to put it on hold for a couple of years. And that meant kind of pivoting again. And so that Sunrise Guide product that had been our baby and our namesake for 15 years at that point, we had been thinking for a few years that it had maybe run its course, and yet it was our namesake. It was like there was so much enthusiasm around it and loyalty and excitement that it was really hard to figure out how to not do it. And then, like I said, the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden we realized that we didn't want to be promoting coupons for small businesses because we all wanted to be doing everything we could to help small businesses survive. We didn't want to be taking discounts. And so we thought this is the perfect time. Like, we've been thinking about, like, how can we make this pivot? And now here's an opportunity to do that. So we decided to stop publishing the Sunrise Guide the fall. I guess our last issue came out. It came out in the fall. It was the 2020 edition, so it came out before the pandemic hit. And so when it came time to do production on the next issue, we decided instead to publish another issue of the magazine. So at that point, we went quarterly on the magazine. And gosh, I've sort of lost track on the question. You were asking me about the evolution of the business and
like your vision for
future.
So where it came from. So when you you started the show 2019, but then COVID happened. So is the show still going?
Yes. So we brought the show back in 2022. Yeah. So this year we just did our 5th annual show. That just happened in April. So we're still doing the show. And along the way, we did launch that app for the Sunrise Guide. That was a companion coupon app, which also went away when the book went away. And we did launch a monthly webinar series, very similar to this, as a matter of fact. We launched that back in the pandemic, and that's still going. And as far as the future, it's funny because when I look back on all of that, I'm like, wow, we've done a lot of change over the years. We've launched a lot of things. Right now, I really think we're focusing on fine-tuning and just doing what we already do better, like just continuing to find ways to improve what we're already doing. So I'm not sure that there's anything brand new that we are looking at, with the exception of a podcast. So that's something we've been talking about for a while, and that would probably be a shift from the webinars into podcasts, because we're hearing feedback that that's how some people are consuming them now anyway. So we may make that shift. But yeah, that's our plan for now, is just to keep doing what we're doing, but do it as, as best as we can. And, the nice thing about publishing or being in media and publishing magazines and producing a show is that every time it's different, so it's not like we're doing the same product every time. Like, it obviously has the same package and the same brand, but it's always new and interesting. It's new content. We're always, trying to stay on top of what are the new trends, and, that involves learning and teaching. And so I think that helps keep it really interesting, is that it's always new. It's always fresh.
That's awesome. You're in terms of upcoming projects, it's primary that podcast is probably a pretty would make even the entire thing more like 4D as well. I feel like, which is kind of good going at all of the angles.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. Do you have any aspirations to scale your publishing model beyond Maine, possibly, or into like new areas of sustainable living?
It's a great question. And it's one that I've gotten a lot over the years, including from a lot of business advisors, in terms of thinking about growth, that's the natural. But I've been pretty deliberate about focusing on Maine. And my reason for that is that this is where my heart and my passion is. And so I've chosen to, instead of expand, beyond Maine and license or franchise, to instead focus here and launch products that serve Maine in different ways. So, I think about shifting the model to, more of a regional or a national. It changes the focus. It becomes more about, the processes and the systems, and, the bottom line. I mean, all those things are important now, but they become more important when it's not just my community, whereas right now it's really about Maine. So that's my focus currently. I can't say never, because you never know, but certainly it's been my focus for 20 years. Well, we celebrate our 20th anniversary next year.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Just get it in early. So on that note, how would you measure success so far, and since you've been doing 20 years of helping Maine go green? How would you measure in the impact? What does it look like to you?
I think we're still here. So I would say that that's one measure of success, is that we've survived. And I think personally, success for me is, because we are mission-based and because that's always been our focus, it has to do with the changes that we're inspiring and supporting in Maine. And so, we get lots of anecdotal feedback all the time, people saying, oh, I read that article and it inspired me to do XYZ, or I just found my new favorite, blah, blah, blah. Or, I learned about heat pumps from you and we just installed heat pumps. And so those are the types of things that fuel us, and that feels like success and impact. We have different clients. Like as a media company, my clients are my readers and followers, and they're also the businesses that we promote, our advertisers. And so for them, success is that they're getting value from being in the publication, like they're getting customers, like really targeted customers coming to their business as a result of being in the publication. And we definitely hear that feedback from our businesses. So at the show we just had recently, I reached out to one of our advisory board members after the show, because he had done some other shows this spring. And I said, how'd we do? How'd we compare to the other show? And I had sent him an email, and thinking, he'll probably get back to me in a day or 5, he's busy. And like 3 minutes later, the phone rang, and he said, he was like, oh my God, I just have to tell you. He's like, we did this other show in 2 different cities and they were 2 days each. And so 4 days of shows. He's like, we got more leads from your one day of a show than from all these other shows. And so that's a nice, we get a lot of those anecdotal,
Yeah.
markers of success. So for the advertisers, and was there a second part of that question? Impact and success and
Kind of like just what it looks like to you, but you said pretty much the fact that you're still here and even growing, I'd say, means that the success is apparent in Maine itself, all of Maine, or most of your list readers must find some meaning at least, which is awesome.
that's our hope. It's our goal.
So on that note, like what advice would you give to someone looking to build a mission-driven business that blends publishing, education, and community impact? Something just like what you're doing is kind of a mesh of a lot of other disciplines coming together for a sort of any kind, I guess any kind of goal really. You just kind of chose making Maine more green, but for someone else it could be another entire different area of public health, I'm guessing.
I think I would say the first thing is to understand if there's a market for the idea, so I think it's important to start talking to people, like as many people as you can connect with, and ask, you need to really learn whether or not people are interested in that product that you're thinking about, and whether they would pay for it. So I think making a list of anyone that you can think of, whether it's individuals or businesses or sectors that might have something to do with the type of business you're interested in starting. And then just start dialing and start reaching out to people and seeing if they'll talk with you for a few minutes, if they'll have lunch with you, if they're willing to just share a little information with you. And then when you do that, I would be sure to, have some questions to ask them, but also ask them if there's anyone else that they think you should talk to, and if there's anything else that they think you should know, that you should learn. And I think that's a really good way to start to figure out, like, is the need there? Is the interest there? Like, you might find out that people are like, oh, I think that product already exists, or I don't know if I'd pay for that. So it's a really good way to just sort of test the market and see if there really is interest there. And then, I don't know, I think I would say to just get really honest with yourself about how much you're willing to sacrifice in terms of time, because starting a business takes a lot of time. Like the early years are definitely not 40-hour weeks, they might be like 60 or more. And so, if you have a young family, like that might not be realistic for where you are. And so I think it's really important to know that, and also to think about the finances, because starting a business too, you're probably going to have to live on a lot less money than you might be used to, but we know that because we're in AmeriCorps. Like we've done that. So, but I think that's a really important step to really think about, like, what can you trim from your budget? How can you live on less while you're starting, while you're getting going, especially if you plan to bootstrap the business. I mean, maybe it's a little different if you're going to have investors, but, for me, it was just starting from scratch. There was that 35,000 that I raised, that helped. But yeah, so I think that's really important. Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people can resonate with also the aspect of at least like finding the right base, and also the luck component and how willing people are for that service. Like you mentioned in Maine, like a lot of the businesses were willing to help, they just hadn't heard a voice. So reaching out and being assertive, those kind of attributes and like are very, at least seem very essential to kind of going for that kind of big mission. Just like you, it could also be in the green business. So what if they were specifically going into something of what you're doing within sustainability? What things look a little different for them depending on location per se?
If they were starting a different type of business, is that what you're saying? I think probably
Yeah.
the structure would be, you'd probably go through a similar process, but and you can get feedback lots of ways. So, you can do feedback, you can do focus groups, you can do surveys, so I think you're going to need to get feedback in one way or another, but depending on the type of business, you could use some different tools for that. And definitely plug into any of the business supporting organizations in your state, and they exist everywhere. And, there are even more now in Maine. Since I started my business, there's Startup Maine is actually happening next week. It's a whole week-long educational opportunity to learn from people about starting up businesses. There's probably similar things in other states as well.
That's awesome. I think it'd be great if anyone listening could maybe search up. We could drop that in the chat maybe for anyone that's around Maine that wants to come even.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for answering my questions, Heather, and I've learned a lot about you, honestly. It's been a very educational and inspiring.
Thanks, Mo. It's been my pleasure. You have great questions too.
Thank you. Well, I guess now we can move into the Q&A section with Heather. Do we have any questions from any participants?
I'll make an observation. Heather's an exceptional convener. Like she can bring people together and what, she talked about calling lots of people, but she also did focus groups too. So like pulled people together to pick their brains and get folks like similar to the question she was saying she talked to people on the phone about. She would ask those questions to the group and have like good conversation about, is this something, that is needed, and who would be, potential businesses or organizations that, might want this. So I think, that that is another type of skill that folks could develop if they want to start their own business, and something that can be super helpful, and that Heather has lots of.
Thanks, Steve. I think a lot of that inspiration came from the AmeriCorps Leader program. Like the training that we got in that program, I feel like that really fed that.
Yeah, totally. Like lots of like meeting facilitation,
Yeah.
very, very functional skills, and public speaking too, right?
Oh, looks like we got a question from Scott Dupuy. He said, how did you get involved with serving on boards? Has it been beneficial for you? Is it something that members should consider, and how can they find opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of ways. Sometimes it has been me expressing interest. So, for example, I was on, for many years, on one of our downtown association boards here where I live. And I got on that board by responding to, I think, a social media post that they had put out to say, anyone who's interested in volunteering or getting involved, please let us know. And so I think that's how that started. And I just got more and more involved and eventually joined the board. And then it's sort of, I think some of it came from my professional experiences. So, for example, I'm currently serving on the PassivhauseMAINE board, and that's really related to the work that we do with Green and Healthy Maine homes. And I think similarly, they posted something in a newsletter saying, we are looking for board member applications. And so I think I responded to that, and that, initiated that process with an interview and such. And then sometimes it's people just out of the blue reaching out, maybe they've, are familiar with me from something in the community and have reached out. I think the Charitable Foundation board that I'm on, that's how that happened. She took me out to lunch and asked if I wanted to serve on that board. Portland Trails, I don't actually remember how that one started. The Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, the former executive director reached out to me to ask if I wanted to serve on the board. But I think those experiences, I was just funny because I was just thinking about, I was reflecting on that today and thinking about one of my current board experiences. And, sometimes it feels like a lot of work, and you sort of feel like you're always a little behind and, what you want to be doing for the board. And I was thinking, oh gosh, maybe I won't renew when it comes up, maybe I won't do another term. But then I remembered that, boards, like you give a lot to them, but you also get a lot from them. It's really a nice opportunity to stay connected to what's going on in the community. I feel like I've made really nice friendships from serving on boards, and also, just probably really good for professional networking, and, learned what else is going on in the community, not only with the organization I'm serving with, but you think of all those other board members and everything that they do. So you're having exposure to all those things. So I think it's a very rich experience. And it's a really nice way to, expand on your professional experience.
It's all
Yeah,
about
great.
networking, I
Great
feel like.
question.
Great question.
Excuse me. I wonder, I've not heard of this happening, but I wonder if there'd be an opportunity for, individuals as they're ending their terms of service to talk about the possibility of, joining the board of that organization in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, it would completely depend on the organization if they were looking for new board members, but it would seem like, members would always have such a you know uh, interesting viewpoint of the organization, right? Like in the community, the individuals that are being served, plus the structure of the staffing, how it's set up and works there. I wonder if there might be opportunities for folks to provide a kind of a an alternative viewpoint on it, some sort of and seeing lots of different parts of it.
A great idea. There's a program through the Maine Association of Nonprofits for young board members. And I know this group looks like a pretty professional level group, but I don't know what the age cutoff is for that. But they do a training program for people who are interested in getting involved with boards. And then they help place them with local organizations. So that downtown association board that I was on, the woman who was my successor as president of that board came from that program at MAP. She had really awesome training, and she was an amazing board member. So if anyone's interested, that could be a good resource.
And a professional development opportunity. It sounds like they get training on how to be a good board member first and then do that. Is that right?
Yep.
Awesome. Great question, honestly. It's interesting. I've never thought about even serving on a board. I'm not sure I'd like that, but who knows? You never know what could happen. Depending on your
Gotta talk to Shauna.
It can be fun.
What's this? Maine Association.
Hi, Heather. I'm just kind of curious, if you had the opportunity to serve again, would you have a particular area in mind that you would like to serve? And it can be anywhere,
That's an interesting question. I always said that I would do the Peace Corps when I retired. It seems like a good time to do the Peace Corps. So maybe that would be a good time to do something like that. Although I'm that was before there was AmeriCorps. Now that we have AmeriCorps, maybe I would do senior corps. Hopefully we'll still have that. And as far as what type of work would I do? I don't know. I'm not sure. There's so many things that are interesting to me, and it's always changing. So my first thought is I would use some of my experience to help, a nonprofit that I care about. But might be nice to also explore a totally new area.
I have a question. I know you spend a lot of time on work, but I also know you have a lot of like interesting pursuits. Sometimes they're work related. I know you were leading bike tours you lead bike tours from time to time. So it kind of counts. Sometimes it counts as like work, but it's also like a very interesting recreational pursuit at the same time. So it's kind of a work-life balance question, but because you do a great job also seems like incorporating some of the fun part of life into work too. So maybe a bit around work life and recreational pursuits. How do you keep all those things in the air?
How do I keep it all in the air? I mentioned that early on with starting a business, there's a lot of hours, and I am really happy to say that now at this point in my business, I have a really good work-life balance. So I rarely work more than 40 hours. I'm pretty good about leaving work at work. And, even when I work at home, just turning off the computer at 5, so I'm pretty strict about my work hours, but when it's done, it's done. And there are some exceptions, there's editing weekends or delivery weekends where I need to be working on the weekend. So I think that's part of it is having that balance and therefore having fun time, non-work time. But there is a melding. Unfortunately, I don't lead bike tours anymore. I wish I could. That stopped maybe after 5 years in the business, but I go on bike tours for fun. I do bike tours. And usually when we're doing a delivery, if I'm doing deliveries on the weekend, we work in a lot of fun. So a couple of years ago, we were doing deliveries to the mountains. It was our winter edition, and we planned a day of skiing in I'm a cross-country skier, so we planned cross-country skiing in every location. We did
nice
Bethel and Rangeley and Carabasset Valley. I think those were the 3 places where we skied. We actually ended up skiing in Farmington too. So maybe that gets at what you're asking,
Yeah.
Just trying to have a little fun when you do have to do the work on the weekends, but also just enjoying Maine, really, any chance I can.
Let's see. Got a question from Scott. He said, do you find there's a natural connection between AmeriCorps service and entrepreneurship, or do you think your career path was unique? Sorry if you've already spoke to this. It's hard to hear where I am.
That would be a really interesting PhD research project. I suspect that people who do AmeriCorps, and certainly AmeriCorps leaders, probably have a much higher percentage of some sort of leadership position, because I think that's really part of the training that we all get when we're in AmeriCorps. We learn how to work together and work in a team, and we learn about communication. And so I think there probably are a lot more people who have AmeriCorps as a background that go into some sort of leadership, whether it's entrepreneurship or public sector leadership, nonprofit management. Yeah, I don't know if I know off the top of my head. I think I probably have more folks who went into nonprofit and public sector than entrepreneurship when I think back to the folks that I'm still in touch with. I had business background before I went into AmeriCorps. So my first career out of college was I didn't mention that, but I was a technical writer. So I wrote computer manuals. So I had that corporate background before I went into AmeriCorps. And then when I came back to Maine after doing the AmeriCorps Leader Program, I worked at the state planning office, which is where the state AmeriCorps office was based at the time. I think it's somewhere else now, right? So I worked there for a while, and then when I left there, I went to work for a nonprofit called Maine Businesses for Social Responsibility. So that really also helped to plant that seed. It was all about, businesses that were focused on a triple bottom line and, people, planet, and profits. So not just profit focused. So I think all of those things went into me starting my business. Yeah, but it's joyous. Like I said, I love AmeriCorps. I love what it has created, what it's done for our communities, and I hope that continues for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot. There is, as these sort of like attacks have happened. One of the sort of one of the positive things that it's certainly shown me anyway, that there's a lot of people that are passionate about what AmeriCorps has done and the types of changes it has in people's and communities. So it's nice to sort of like see that and hear that. And it does give me a lot of hope that it'll continue. It could certainly take quite a battering. I mean, it's already taking quite a battering here, but I'm relatively hopeful that there will definitely be, in my mind, something that survives, through the ashes, and will come out the other side. So,
yeah, these have been really great questions. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Heather.
My pleasure. It's fun to share this story.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Well, it's just really nice to be with other AmeriCorps members. So I really appreciate you organizing this and asking me to join tonight.
Thank you so much, Heather. We've learned a lot from you, and I don't see that. Yeah, the story's gold. Nothing more to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mo. Great job. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Mo.
Thank
Those were awesome
you.
questions.
Well, thank you, Heather. Thank you, guys.